At his press conference in Mar-a-Lago, President-elect of the United States, Donald Trump, emphasized that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky needs to prepare for signing a peace agreement that would end the war between Russia and Ukraine. Putin, according to Trump, should also agree to such an arrangement. However, this time, the elected American president did not mention a single word about his promises to end the war in 24 or 48 hours, even before his inauguration to the highest office in the United States. Understandably, Trump was not ready to explain how he was going to force the Russian leader to agree to a peace deal with Ukraine, especially since these statements were made against the background of his own statements. Putin, the expanded board meeting of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, a board that demonstrated that both Putin himself and his entourage not only do not intend to end the long-standing war with Ukraine, but are also preparing for a long confrontation with the West. The Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, Andrei Belousov, even emphasized that the Russian armed forces must prepare for a possible conflict with NATO member countries, which could occur, as he emphasized, in the coming decades. Trump, predictably, once again spoke out against the authorization of US President Joe Biden's administration to strike Russian sovereign territory with American long-range missiles. The rumor that the current US president informed his successor about this decision has been dispelled. Trump says that he wasn't consulted about this and that this decision, which indeed creates new opportunities for the Ukrainian armed forces in their fight against Russian aggression, is a mistake. He made it clear that after his inauguration as President of the US, he would be ready to reconsider this decision, which might be the only real, concrete action from the new American president regarding the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Trump also emphasized that he does not invite Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to his own inauguration, but he would be willing to welcome him if Zelensky decides to come. This is, to put it mildly, a humiliating statement towards Ukraine and its leadership, yet it fits quite well with his usual style. Trump also emphasized that he is not inviting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to his own inauguration, but would be willing to host him if Zelensky comes. To put it mildly, a humiliating statement towards Ukraine itself and its first person, but quite close to the usual style. The new American president, both while he was leading the American state and while he was preparing for his return to the highest office in the United States. Journalists asked Trump if his peace deal with Russia means Ukraine must give up territory. Trump noted many cities are destroyed. He avoided discussing cities under Russian occupation, like Crimea and parts of Donetsk and Luhansk. Instead, he shifted to Manhattan construction. Trump did not clearly answer this question, saying that there are many Ukrainian cities that are completely destroyed, and people will not return there. But he misled the question of those Ukrainian cities that were not directly in the war zone and that have been under long-term occupation by the Russian army, say, since 2014, such as Crimea and part of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Instead, the elected American president shifted to the issues of construction in Manhattan, which, as a professional real estate expert, he finds much closer and more understandable than any major political issues, especially the Russia-Ukraine war. So from these statements by the elected US president, we can draw some quite important conclusions, which, as he could understand as a professional real estate expert, is much closer and more understandable than any major political issues, especially the Russia-Ukraine war. So, from these statements by the elected US president, we can draw some quite important conclusions. Donald Trump has no clue how to end the Russia-Ukraine war. But of course, he's not going to admit that to the journalists who would immediately remind him of his fulfilled promises on this important issue. Second, Trump continues to hold out hope for his agreements with Russian President Vladimir Putin, despite the fact that Putin himself demonstrates complete unwillingness to seek any real compromise, not only with Ukraine, but also with the West. And he hopes for deals that would humiliate not only the current president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, but also the new US president, Donald Trump. Thirdly, Trump isn't disclosing the level of his contacts with Vladimir Putin, which seems quite strange, given the official statements from his team about the new American president's interactions with many world leaders. The Kremlin firmly denies that Vladimir Putin has communicated with Donald Trump. The new American president has once again not answered questions about his contacts with Putin. Whether they were not, the surprising part is not the questionable media release, but the new US president's reluctance to discuss his contacts with the Russian president. Seems Trump is unsure whether to confirm or deny his informal talks with the Russian leader. And the most surprising thing in this situation is not even the publication of this information, which may not be true, but the obvious reluctance of the new US president to say anything about his contacts with the Russian president. It seems that Trump himself doesn't yet know how to best agree that such contacts took place, or to firmly deny the fact of his informal communication with the Russian leader. Of course, a lot regarding the terms of a potential agreement between Russia and Ukraine to end the war is something Trump is putting off, not just until his inauguration, but also until what he called his first meeting. Since the new US president had several meetings with the current president of Ukraine, with Volodymyr Zelensky, it's clear that we're talking about the first meeting of the new president of the United States with the president of the Russian Federation. Now to the truth, kids. At this meeting, Trump will be in a weak position precisely because he, not Putin, is the one initiating this communication. Trump's predecessor, Joseph Biden, stopped communicating with Vladimir Putin specifically because of the aggressive war, Russia against Ukraine. A war he insisted on not starting. The US president's contacts with the Russian president were avoided due to ignoring warnings from Washington. Initiating agreements would mean the US president appears weak. If the first official in the United States initiates contacts and agreements with the president of the Russian Federation, this will automatically mean that the new president of the United States will be in a weak position, in a position of a supplicant in relation to the president of the Russian Federation. This is exactly the tactical goal of Russian President Vladimir Putin, which he is confidently pursuing as the inauguration of the new American president approaches and the power changes in the United States. And this is not only about the Russian-Ukrainian war, but also about strengthening Putin's position in the post-Soviet space as such, and the agreements between Moscow and Beijing regarding the containment of the United States, which were obviously reached during the recent visit to Beijing. The deputy head of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, former President Dmitry Medvedev, and Medvedev's negotiations with the head of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, the same Xi Jinping who was invited to Trump's inauguration, has no plans to show up in Washington. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, subscribe to my social networks, to the channels on Patreon, Ko-fi, and Donatella, which help develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature right here on YouTube. Wishing you victories and peace. Good luck.